E nā mauna e tūake nei, e nā awa e tere atu nei, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai hoki mai anō kia Tapatahi, ko Wena Harawira hau. E whai ake nei, well, it's okay to go to the pub, eat out and shop in supermarkets, but mourning our dead is still strictly controlled. So is going to church. John Whaanga of the Ministry of Health discusses the government's reasoning behind the decision. And we talk to the bakers in Waitahanui on the shores of Lake Taupo about their Rewena-thon.
My mother-in-law taught me 48 years ago, and bless her, she's not here now, and I've just carried on doing it. And my bug that I'm using at the moment is centuries old. It's over 100 years old.
Ka ti mātua rā ki ngā rono kōrero o te wā, anei a pōtaka maipi.
Tēnā koe Wena, kei aku pare raukura hurino i te motu a tamari e. Maranga ake rā i te iwi ki te pire public health, nei te urupare a te mema o te rōpū nahinara a Alfred Ngaro, i aia e wero i te kākari o te pānuitanga tuarua ki roto i te whare paremata i ngā pō.
Mr. Speaker, I want to go to again in the bill, and I want to point to and highlight this issue here on page 3, under enforcement. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, what it highlights this in the second paragraph, to enable enforcement of the measures and orders, the police are given a power to enter a premises, including private dwellings and maraes, without a warrant. Without a warrant. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the question to the Attorney General, why was maraes highlighted here?
Kaore tonu te tangihanga e whakaitia i raro i te taumata ohiti tuarua, me te tū o ngā pihi o ētahi mātanga tikanga, e puku ana ngā rai o AHORANGI pau TEMARA, he aro kore no te kāwanatanga ki ngā aratohu i tonua e ia mo ngā tikanga tangihana i raro i te taumata ohiti tuarua. Anei akere, am I right?
Te kiri ana AHORANGI pau TEMARA.
Kei te tino kitea te he, o te kotahi rau ki roto i te pāpara kāuta, o te toru te kau, ki runga i te whira hutu pōro, tuki ai, rere ai te toto.
AHORANGI pau TEMARA. Hoi kei te mau tonu te premia ki tōna whakatau, aha kua te tau mahatanga, kua utainga ki runga i ngā whānau.
If you do have someone who is lying at marae and people are coming in groups, then yes, that is something that could be managed and would be within the guidelines that have been set.
Aha kua te mau tohenga o ētahi i ngā hāpori Māori, hei tā te Premier Tuarua tā Winston Peters, tērā ētahi atu e pū aroha ana ki te kāwanatanga me tō rātau marama ki te uaua o ngā whakatau. I tāna tū ki mua i te aroaro o te hunga papāho, ka kōrero a Peters mo te pai tata o te kāwanatanga kia noho uru tā kore a Aotearoa.
Look, it was put very well by a undertaker this morning on a program that we don't always listen to, but it was Morning Report, and he deeply sympathised with the government because he talked about the tragic personal and emotional circumstances. But the number one desire of people who attend a tangi or a funeral is to emotionally connect by embracing other ways of making a connection, and he understood that. He was saying that, and so, you know, for once I heard from an industry, someone who understood why the health department and the government is concerned, and we hope to get out of that situation as fast as we possibly can. But right here, right now, the funeral circumstance was so difficult.
E tōtara wāhi rua ana ngā whakaro ki te whakatau a te kāwanatanga kia te kauanake ngā tangata ki ngā whare karakia. Nei, nā tēnei i rere ana te pātai te ngā hāhi, ka pēhea tā rātou chaki a wairua nei i te tangata, i te wā noho here, anei a ruku wai tipene, Alan.
Mihingare, katorika, momona, pakipaki, hako te whakapono, kakapi tonu.
Initial reaction was, hoha, irritated, and a bit sort of angry about it, and frustrated. I thought that seemed at first to not make any sense at all.
It was always about making sure that we meet together, and that's a big deal because, again, like when we come together and our wairua connects and we connect that back to atua, me oranga kia tātou.
e toru ira iwa piri ona tāra ka whakangāwa e te kāwanatanga ki te rāngai haura. Ka puta tēnei karere e ruara i mua mai te tāhua pūtea mo te taunei. Ka mutu koinei te whakangāongatanga nui katoa. Kua kite ake e te rāngai haura i ngā tau te kau neke atu. Kei a Regan Parani, te roanga ake o tēnei.
He rautaki kei te manakotia ka taunaki te rāngai haura o Aotearoa.
If there's one thing that COVID-19 has shown us is that having a strong, well-funded health system is critical to the well-being of New Zealanders.
Ina nahi ko te rangi whakamutunga i tūai ngā wāhi tiro o te whānau āpanui. Hei tā te iwi kua rua marama ngā tuao e tiaki ana i tō rātou rohe ka whakawātia tia e i te kainamutanga o te taumata o hiti tuarua. Kāti, koira ngā kōrero mo tēnei upoko o te haora me hoki kia Tapatahi.
Hoi anō, mōrena rā e te iwi. Well, the rules around tangihanga have been relaxed to allow groups of up to 10 people to attend at separate times under Alert Level 2. Following the announcement, many people voiced their frustration about the restrictions on social media. Well, with me now is John Whaanga, the Deputy Director General for Māori Health at the Ministry of Health, to discuss these restrictions. Mōrena, John.
Mōrena, Wena, mōrena koutou katoa.
Tell me why these restrictions are in place for tangihanga.
I think these restrictions are not put in place just for tangihanga, they're put in place across the board. And I think, first of all, it was a really hard decision for, I think, Cabinet and Ministers to make. Secondly, most importantly, we didn't want to lose sight of any of the gains we've made during lockdown and before that. I think, thirdly, there was a concern based on recent information from overseas about the potential for secondary waves if we lifted too early. And I think the last area is obviously it's much easier to contact, trace and follow up on smaller groups of, say, 10 than 100. But can I also say it's not about the ability of our people to exercise tikanga or to manage those things. As you'll see, these restrictions have been placed across the board. And as I said, those big considerations and lengthy considerations for Cabinet were very much about those things.
But it seems that the government does have some concerns about what Māori may do under these restrictions with the urgent passing of the Public Health Response Act. Can you tell me what you know about that Act?
Actually, I haven't been involved in that Act specifically. It's being developed in another part of the ministry. What I do know more broadly is that it provides a framework from which we are able to make sure we're able to continue through with public health measures and there's appropriate enforcement on the other side of it. But I haven't been involved in the development of the legislation specifically.
Are you worried about the public backlash about this Public Health Response Act, though?
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm not. While my directorate hasn't been involved necessarily in the development of the bill, we will obviously, like other parts of the ministry, be looking at and providing advice.
Why weren't you involved, though, John? Can you? Sorry to interrupt you, John. Can I just interrupt you? Why weren't you involved?
No, it's not so much that part of my team might have been involved in the development and the considerations early on. I haven't seen the latest draft of the bill is all I'm saying, so I'm not up to date on where they finally landed on that. But as a general principle, my directorate works across most of the major work streams in the ministry.
The government did seek consultation on tangihanga guidelines, but the restrictions aren't in line with the advice it received from iwi, hapu and whānau. So why were they ignored?
Oh, look, I think the first thing is they weren't ignored. We certainly worked in good faith with, because it was my directorate leading that work, with iwi and Māori experts around the country last week, based on an understanding that there was a likelihood under Alert Level 2 where we'd be able to have up to 100 people gathering. So that advice was taken into consideration. As I said, if you look at these measures, they're measures across the whole country and they affect all New Zealanders. It's not about that our tangihanga processes or our marae processes were exclusively looked at outside of those things. And it's certainly not about trust and confidence in our people to look after things. I think that certainly the public health considerations with respect to looking at New Zealanders as a whole, were preeminent, I think, in the considerations of government.
The National Māori Pandemic Group says the restrictions are cruel, punishing and lazy. It also maintains the restrictions appear to be based on the spread of infection through clusters at a time when there was limited knowledge about COVID-19. Do you agree?
Look, I think there are a lot of technical arguments which I'm not the best versed to talk about in that regard, but there are several things in there. I think there are very strong views that it's important we don't lose the gains, the public health gains we've made in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Secondly, there is some concern about recent evidence coming from overseas about the potential for secondary waves. And I think, what's most important is how do we protect our people and keep them safe? But I understand, the other frustrations expressed by the Māori Pandemic Group about how difficult this is in the context of tangihanga. E aroha nā au ki tō tātou iwi. Me ngā mate I Wainganui tō tātou nei rāhui nei.
But surely, John, bar owners are being told they're more capable than a marae of maintaining hygiene and social distancing.
My understanding is that's something available to them next week. But I don't think it's about, and I certainly don't think it's about trying to punish one area over another. My understanding is this isn't about trust and confidence in iwi and Māori organisations who've stepped up to the mark consistently during COVID-19. It was more at a general public health level about what is in the best interest of the country moving forward and what can we learn. And these things change very quickly. So some of this information from overseas, for instance, has been stuff that's only come to light in the last week or so. And I think Cabinet wanted to make sure that it had the most up-to-date information before it made what is a huge decision. But I have to acknowledge the disappointment out there, and I've certainly heard firsthand from people. They're not very happy about the announcement on Monday.
You talk about trust and confidence, but isn't the Public Health Response Act an indication that the government is not trusting Māori?
I'm not sure if I can comment on that in terms of the Act, but what I would say that we've consistently tried to do is work with iwi and Māori organisations through the COVID-19 and the pandemic crisis. And I think there's some really good examples there. Was it perfect? I don't think so. I think there are things we can learn from it. It's certainly my intention when we get to the other side of the alert levels to work with key people to say, what is it we might be able to do better, for instance, in the future if we have to escalate again. But I think that's part of the reason why why taking a very safe approach at the moment is really important, because we don't want to be having to go to similar style restrictions anytime soon.
Will the government, will the Ministry of Health be looking towards iwi for advice about this situation anyway? Because iwi have set up checkpoints, iwi have provided support to vulnerable whānau and kaumātua, iwi ran testing stations and administered flu jabs. They were proactive, where the government seemed to be absent. They understand the risks and are more than capable of protecting their communities. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's obviously they're in touch with their communities, and I think, as I said, there's been good examples of where we've worked with them, and we're continuing to. I was fortunate enough to be part of a meeting led by Ministers Davis and Minister Henare last week with the National Iwi Chairs Forum, for instance. So we're already working with them, and it's our intention to keep working with them and other Māori groups as we move forward. And actually, in terms of the community development side of things and how it is we engage with communities, we have to do that. So I think we're certainly keen to do that, and we're also very keen for them to tell us about what we can do better.
John Whaanga from the Ministry of Health. Tēnā koe, thank you for your time this morning.
Tēnā koe, Wena. Tēnā koe te katoa. E nhora.
While the hapu of Te Whānau have decided to open their tribal borders today, 9 of the 12 hapu have also decided to open their marae for tangihanga of up to 100 people. They say they'll ensure strict social distancing and hygiene protocols are upheld. So, no hakari, no sleepovers, no hongi, and the tū pāpaku will go straight to the urupa after ceremonies are completed. With me now is Louis Rapihana of Te Whānau Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Wena.
The Public Health Response Act. I think it's targeting you guys because you've said you're going to have a tangi with up to 100 people attending.
Ai, He ua te rongo ki ngā whakatau o te kāwana. You know, we find it very hard in Te Whānau Apanui to listen to the whakatau from the kāwana e pāna ki ngā tangihanga. Around tangihanga, our people have been isolated and mourning for too long already, and we need to be there to support them, and we as a hapu, as a iwi, will ensure that we do that.
So before the government changed its mind around tangihanga, had the Whānau Apanui Hapu Chairs Forum already decided their approach to open up tangi to 100 people, that this would work better for your people?
Yes, we had listened to the original recommendations that were released from the kāwana, and we took those on board, and we find that we can actually manage that much better with that number of 100 in regards to sanitation, social distancing on our marae. Better than a pāpara kouta can with people who are under the influence.
Why do you think the advice given to the government from iwi, hapu and whānau around tangihanga protocols have been ignored?
At the end of the day, the government will do what the government wants to do. But as far as we are concerned, waiho mātou ki a mātou. Let te whānau Apanui, let ngā iwi Māori decide how we will operate on our marae.
I know that members of Te Whānau Apanui have died during lockdown and while restrictions have been in place. Can you describe how the inability to mourn the dead affected the iwi?
It's very difficult for our people. You know, yes, we've had around 3-4 deaths already during the lockdown period, but we're very grateful to the whānau also for understanding at that time the need to restrict the people going to the tangi. And we supported those whānau throughout, right from the beginning from the death right through to the burial. And you know, one thing, it's very hard to say farewell when we can't actually be with the whānau. However, we worked through it, and we had drive-bys throughout the iwi, considering they have to go outside of the iwi to prepare the two pāpaku. So we were able to drive through the state highway so that hapu can stand at their gates and pohiritia I a rātou kua mate.
Should, God forbid, the police enter private homes and marae in Te Whānau Apanui to try and stop the gathering of more than 10 people to mourn their dead for tangihanga, what do you expect the iwi response to be?
The iwi will be there, and we will support the whānau no matter what. We'll work through the issues around protocol that the police have to follow with them and to have those discussions. And we're not afraid to have those discussions with our fellow colleagues in New Zealand Police to ensure that our whānau are not affected any more than they need to be.
Well, today you decided to lift the borders on your own accord. Why today?
Today was the hapu decided that because that's when we find that we're in a safe position at the moment within Te Whānau Apanui, within the wider district of Opotiki, and also within the wider region of Te Moana Nui a Toi. We feel that we are very low risk at the moment. So for today, you know, we find it very comforting for us to lift it. On top of that, we also didn't want it to look like we were following the government.
Will you be working with local MPs, people like Tamati Kofi, for instance, Kiri Tapu Allen, to talk about your concerns around these issues?
Absolutely, we always discuss our issues with our local MPs. We also have discussed the issues around the tangihanga limits with New Zealand Police. And so they're very much aware of our concerns and of what we are actually going to be doing during this period. So it won't be new to them at all.
What's been their response to your concerns?
They totally understand our concerns and they totally get it that we are there to support our people, and we will do everything we can to ensure social distancing and sanitation is happening within tangihanga on our marae. I think they have a lot of faith in us to do that, considering our working relationship from the beginning of this pandemic within Aotearoa.
Are there things in place that the iwi is going to keep going, like some of the lessons that have been learned that people have found out to be quite a good idea? I'm thinking about the online shopping you guys were running there for a while too.
Absolutely, that will be continuing throughout this pandemic, the Apanui world. We're just looking at ways of how we can keep it running, and also post-COVID. how can we keep this operation of online shopping for our people on the coast continuing into the future. We'll also be supporting our whānau right throughout in regards to food deliveries and all that kind of stuff, packages, hygiene packages. The other thing we'll also be continuing to operate is our industry permitting system to ensure that we have an understanding of who is actually coming into our iwi on that large basis, to ensure that they have good health and safety standards within their organisations operating within our area.
Has this brought Te Whānau closer together, made them stronger?
Absolutely, it's brought all our hapu together, it's brought all our whānau together, working as one for the greater betterment and the well-being of our people.
This is probably right out there. It kind of comes out of left field here, Louis, but do you think, we had, a few years ago, we had the foreshore seabird issue. Do you think the tūpāpaku issue under COVID-19 is likely to be a game changer for Labour in terms of the election?
Who knows? Who knows what the future is going to hold? You know, we support whoever supports our te iwi Māori the best.
So what are you going to do once we get back to level 2? What's the first thing that you want to do with relative freedom?
I want to get back onto our marae. I want to be able to look after our people, our wairua, our tinana, our hinengaro. We need to get back to some sort of normality around there. I'm missing my marae.
Ka alo hoki koe. Thank you very much for your time. Rui tāpana pon te whānau apanui. Rapihana, I beg your pardon.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou.
Akati, hea hau whakaaro mō wā mātou kaupapa. Tēnā pōhi mai ki runei te wārani pukamata a whakaata Māori, I mera rānei kia Tapatahi at māoritelevision.com. Kia whakatātātau mo te wā poto, kia mau tonu mai rā. Hoki mai anō, while gatherings for church services, weddings, memorials, baptisms and tangi all are still restricted to 10 people under Alert Level 2. Joining me now to discuss the effect of this decision is Archdeacon Denita Simmons, the chaplain to Kingi Tūheitia and the Director of Mission and Education for the Anglican Church, and my favourite minister in the whole wide world. Tēnā koe?
Oh, morena, Wena. Oh, I like that last title. Better add it to my email signature. Morena kia koe.
So what have your parishioners told you about the restrictions?
I think a significant level of disappointment, and because there's just some serious inconsistency. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to comply, and we'll do that. But I guess we want to share this message of it doesn't seem to make sense to us that you can go to the movies, you can go to the mall, a lot of what other people were saying this morning, but churches, you can't go to, tangihanga, you can't go to there. It seems incredibly inconsistent and a bit hard for us to cope with at this time, but we'll do our best.
I realise you may not know much about it, but the Public Health Response Act is planning to allow police into private dwellings and onto marae without warrants, and that was rushed through the House last night. What do you think about that act?
I have significant concern about that. I've only seen what I've seen on Facebook about it, and that's never the greatest source of all things true and accurate. But my kind of leading question is, why do we need to specifically single out marae? What, you know, private dwellings and marae? What about churches? You know, people could conceivably gather there in larger groups than 10. But we're not singling out them or other places, community halls, other places where people gather. This act just seems to specifically want to single out marae, which again I struggle with. And I look at examples up and down the motu of te iwi Māori and their responses to this, and I actually see some of the best responses in the country. Te whānau apanui, te hunga ki te hiko o te ika. That they have some of the best responses up and down the motu, yet it seems to be we've been singled out yet again. And he mea pauri mo te ngākau.
Is the government being too controlling, do you think?
Well, I think they need to be consistent. So if it's going to be 10, if that's the benchmark, well, then it needs to be 10 across the board. 10 at malls, 10 at bars, 10 at the movies, 10 on aeroplanes, 10 at marae, not 10 at marae and 10 at churches. But, you know, as many as can fit in my mall just down the road here from me. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
Section 15 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights upholds the right of every person to express their religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, or teaching, either individually or in community with others, and either in public or in private. Do you think the restrictions violate a person's religious rights?
Perhaps. I think one of the things that's come out of this that's been good is it's brought, I'll speak just for my hāhi here, it's brought Te Hāhi Mihinare a bit out of, shall we say, te ao kōwhatu, and we've learnt about wonderful new things like Facebook and TikTok and, you know, other great things. And those things have been really, really good for us. Look, the restrictions are hard. I want to quote one of Aotearoa's finest mihinare, Rewena Parata, who said to me in a meeting, extraordinary times call for extraordinary solutions. I roto I ēnei wā, our church dug deep, te iwi Māori dug deep, and we looked for extraordinary solutions to the pandemic that we faced. I would suggest, and I feel quite flash now, my message to the government, to the Prime Minister would be, are these latest levels of guidelines and restrictions, are they extraordinary? And I would suggest they're not. They're not consistent. We're not continuing on the same projection that we were following. All of a sudden now we've got a diversion and two paths where we're left, and we want to be extraordinary. Te ao Māori, we are extraordinary, always have been, always will be. Te Hāhi Mihinare, we're trying to be extraordinary in these tough times, and I feel a bit like we've just been given an inconsistent, confusing statement now.
Brian Tamaki of Destiny Church says he's going ahead with the church service on Sunday despite the restrictions. Are you thinking about bucking the system too?
No. It's important to note in Te Hāhi Mihinare, each kind of rohe, I guess if we were to translate it to Māori whakaaro, he mana tō tēnā iwi, whērā rawa ki Te Hāhi Mihinare. So we don't have one national polity, we have several. Our rohinga here in Waikato, Mātātua and Te Arawa, we've decided not to, because our primary concern remains for te tiaki I ngā kaumātua, and the fact that the majority of our people are kaumātua that come to church. So we've made the decision to stay shut. Also, we don't have some of the resourcing available to make sure that the place is clean, sanitised and all those sorts of things. It certainly wasn't an easy decision. It was a really hard one. Based on what we heard last week from the Prime Minister, we were preparing to open, but when the notice came out on Monday, we had to do a quick rethink, and we weren't able to pull it off quick enough, but we will as soon as we are able to.
I know that guidelines have been distributed to the Anglican Church about managing a booking system to ensure no one comes to church and has to be turned away. So are you still planning to follow those guidelines under level 2?
Yes, yeah, that's what we want to try and, you know, again, trying to find extraordinary solutions. That one of the difficult things for us would be if we knew that someone came and, you know, there's a big sign at the door, sorry, we're full, you know, there's an ironic biblical story about no more room at the inn. So, you know, we're trying to find our best way to make sure that we don't turn anybody away. And that's, you know, that's the great thing about Facebook. We have thousands join us on Facebook. And so we're trying to do that and learning. I tell you what, I've learned more about live streaming in the last 4 weeks than I thought I'd ever know in my life. So.
Ka rawe ke koe. Nau mai ki te ao hou.
Tēnā.
Aye. Thank you very much, Archdeacon Denita Simmons from the Anglican Church. Mōrena rā, haere rā, ka kite. While funeral directors have had to work in challenging circumstances during COVID-19, the restrictions continue to test their profession and practices. With me now is Francis Tipene of Tipene Funerals. Morena e hoa.
Morena, tēnā koe, tēnā koe.
Aloha hoki a hau ki tō taiwa iwi e hoa. So what challenges have you had to overcome to manage the restrictions the government has put in place over the last 7 weeks? Just remind us.
So some of the challenges were obviously not allowing Te Pāpaku to go home. However, under Alert Level 2, we were able to do that. The gatherings, again, is another big issue for farewelling loved ones. So that's still not being able to happen. So it's still being able to be 10. But having said that, I think the restrictions have eased ever so slightly, which is a little better. Look, there's a lot of negativity, and I could throw and say a lot of things, but I'm trying to look for the positives to uplift our iwi and manage things with the circumstances in which we're faced with.
Do you feel that the government has listened and supported to funeral directors' advice?
Not really. I mean, I don't see where the consultation took place. With, face-to-face, kanohi ki te kanohi, or internet ki te internet, whatever we're going to say, but it never really happened. And I guess, again, it's coming down to trusting our people. I mean, like Reverend Anita Simmons was saying before me, he was quite right in saying that our people are good at protecting ourselves. I mean, look at the right to Whaanga and our people up north, up home, have done a wonderful job, and I don't see why they would ever want to put each other in harm's way, especially during tūpapaku or tangihanga. And so it's a little bit unfair. I mean, there's a lot of emotion at the moment. You add on the pukuriri on top of grief, and that just turns into something horrible. But however, it is about trying not to focus on that with the people at the moment and trying to find some solutions. One of them is I must take my hat up to the Manurua Maraerangi McLean Rātou Mā and the way in which they're going to manage via Maggie's tangihanga. And it's wonderful and extraordinary in the measures that they're taking to have iwi come on at different times, whānau come on at different times, and 10 in a bubble. So it can be managed with great leadership and some clear guidelines.
You would have first-hand experience about the stress, the grief and the anger over some of the restrictions that we're facing under Level 2. People being able to go to the pub, people being able to go to the cinema, to restaurants, to cinemas, but they can't go to their marae as a group under normal circumstances. Do you feel that that's just adding to the pressure you have to deal with?
Absolutely. Look, let me make this clear. I understand the differences between going to the marae, to the mall or to the movies for a kai or to watch a picture, to going to a tangi or to a marae. I mean, even under Alert Level 4, I was there ripping people apart because, the first thing you want to do is to embrace, hongi and kiss and connect with someone physically. And so I get where the government are coming from in that. But again, give that responsibility back to us and back to allowing our people to say not to do that. I think once they were reminded at the door before they come into the funeral home, especially our kuia and kaumātua, to let them know ke kaua e hongi and kaua e pā ki te tangata, that, oh yes, they just needed that reminder. And so I do feel it's unfair in that way. I think it's the message and the way and they've done it. It's just like 100 people there to the movies and the restaurants, but only 10 to funerals. I think it could have been worded a little better to make it easier on the ear to take.
Do you feel the government has been too controlling?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I think, again, we should have had some trust put into the people, some consultation. Let's work together on this. But I get where they're sitting in terms of they're worried that it could explode and get out of hand again. But, tēnei mea te mana mo te hake, mōhio kia mōhio tēnei Ngāti Taupo me pehe te whakahaere tika I wā tātou ake tangihanga.
Do you feel that change may come through lobbying, more lobbying under level 2 for change to happen?
Possibly, if we all get together, both funeral directors, kuia, kaumātua, taumata on marae themselves, and just to present ourselves to the government with some options and some guidelines of our own making and measures. I think I saw a post last night of, with Rawiri Waitahanui saying what they were going to do down at the Whānau, and man, it was joyful to see, because they've been very protective of their people and their iwi and their hapu, and now they've got their own guidelines put in place, and they said they won't be told by the government how to run marae, which is beautiful, because they're going to put things in place to ensure safety measures and practices for their whānau, hapu and iwi. And again, if we were given that opportunity as funeral directors and as whānau to do that with our loved ones and tangihanga and marae, that would be great.
Kia ora e hoa, tēnā koe iwi nā kōrero. Thank you very much, Francis Tipene from Tipene Funerals. Well, we'd like to know what you think. Please let us know on our Facebook page or send us an email, tapatahi@maoritelevision.com. Kia huri ake tātou i nei ki ngā tai pito pito o te wā.
Tēnā koe Wena, moa tarau e te iwi. Maranga ake rā e te iwi ki te pire public health, nei te ki taurangi a te mema o te rōpu nahinara a Alfred Ngaro, i aia e wero ana i te pānuitanga tuarua, ki roto i te whare paremata i tū kākari i nā pō.
Mr. Speaker, I want to go to again in the bill, and I want to point to and highlight this issue here on page 3, under enforcement. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, what it highlights this in the second paragraph, to enable enforcement of the measures and orders, the police are given a power to enter premises, including private dwellings and maraes, without a warrant. Without a warrant. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the question to the Attorney General. Why was maraes highlighted here?
Alfred Ngaro. Kāore tonu te tangihana e whakaitia i raro i te taumata ohiti tuarua. Me te tū o ngā pihi o ētahi mātanga tikanga, e puku ana ngā rai o AHORANGI pau TEMARA he aro kore no te kāwanatanga ki ngā ara tohu i tonua eia mō ngā tikanga tangihana i raro i te taumata ohiti tuarua. Ahakoa te mautohenga o ētahi e ngā hāpuri Māori, hei tā te Premier Tuarua tā Winston Peters, tērā ētahi atu e pū aroha ana ki te kāwanatanga me tō rātau marama ki ngā uaua o ngā whakatau. E toru ira iwa piriona tāra ka whakangāwa e te kāwanatanga ki te rāngai haora, ka puta tēnei karere e rua rā i mua mai i te tāhua pūtea mo te tau nei. Ka mutu koi nei te whakangāwatanga nui ka toakoa ki te ake e te rāngai haora i ngā te kautau neke atu. Kāti, koira katoa ngā kaupapa matua mo tēnei haora, ka hoki anō ki a koe e Wena.
Kia ora pōtaka. Māori baker Josie Wall is a kuia from Waitahanui on the shores of Lake Taupo who saw a Māori TV story about iwi baking rēwena bread for kaumātua during lockdown. So she and her daughter Janice decided they should do the same. They gathered together 11 of their gun bakers to make 250 rēwena for Tūwharetoa kaumātua. How did Tūwharetoa, well, you two, the Wall family, you and Janice and Josie, how did you become involved in the Rewena-thon?
Mum had been, during the lockdown, Mum had been, she had been making rewena bread daily and delivering it out the whānau here in Waitahanui. And we had followed Kiriama Wright Kōrero, his story on the Rewena-thon, when it came from Māori marae and then ended up in Tauranga Moana, and we thought that would be an awesome kaupapa for our iwi. How could we support something like that? And at that time for myself it was about the kaupapa, the initiative of it, but also celebrating the rewena bug.
How about you, Josie? How long, in fact, have you been making rewena bread? Who taught you?
My mother-in-law taught me 48 years ago, and bless her, she's not here now, and I've just carried on doing it. And my bug that I'm using at the moment is centuries old. It's over 100 years old. So it's just been handed down and through the years, and I've just used it.
Is there a particular baking style or some kind of secret ingredient that your mother-in-law taught you or that you may have come up with over the years, Josie?
Oh, yeah, I suppose so. Each one of us are different. We all do it differently. Our bugs are different. They react differently. And it's like anything, if you put a lot of love into it, you know, they say about when you're baking and you put the love in and you can feel it. And that, for me, I can see it. And I talk to my girls. I've got 2 of them. And one is that century, you know, she's over 100 years old. And the other one is only a few months old. Oh. So my Rewenas, that is. So that's where I am. If I'm waffling, tell me. I'm hopeless on this.
Oh, good.
Oh, my gosh.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful to hear.
Yeah.
How about you, Janice? Your mum obviously taught you how to make rewena. Do you enjoy it?
Oh, yeah. I'm the best bread maker out. Ask any of my whānau. No, actually. Me and my sister are hopeless at making bread. So we're very much supporters and the biggest critic of the rewena from Mum, and we're lucky enough for her. She's been making it all our lives. But what I like and love about it is when she shares it to our whānau, the smile that's on their faces when they get to enjoy a piece of rewena. So for myself, just very humbled to be able to get 11 bakers throughout our iwi baking in their own bubbles, right from Taupo right down to Tapatahi. We've got rewena bakers, and between all of these bakers, they are producing 250 rewena bread, a pound of butter and a pot of honey for 250 of our kaumātua. And we're lucky enough to have Te Kora Wairopu Tautoko supporting our initiative by delivering the bread to our kaumātua. So our bakers don't have to go outside their bubble. Everything's done within their bubble, and lucky enough to have Tauhara Geothermal Charitable Trust sponsor such a kaupapa. That's more for the well-being of our kaumātua going through our pandemic time. We're still in level 3, so that's, you know, some are still really nervous about where we are. So this kind of initiative, kaupapa, whakapikis, the wairua of our kaumātua, which is why I did it, which is for my mother picked this initiative off. I'm just somebody who was able to use Facebook as a platform to get the nominations for the bakers. So, yeah, this is totally Mum.
I know that you're donating butter and honey with the parāoa rēwena. My favourite way of eating rēwena is with smoked trout. From Waitahanui's rivers, of course. What's your favourite way of eating rēwena?
Honey. Honey or peanut butter and jam. And, of course, the butter. The butter is thicker than the bread sometimes, but that's how we roll.
It's always nice to have a bit of bread with your butter, yeah.
That's the one.
How about, so back in Tauranga Moana, 235 rewena bread were made in 48 hours. How long do you reckon it'll take you guys to make 250?
Well, in the time frame that we're doing it with, because everyone's in different areas of the iwi, so they're probably baking about 5 hours a day. We're probably doing it in about 32 hours.
Wow. So one final question.
Maybe a 48-hour challenge, but we're doing it in a shorter time, but we've got more bakers than what Tauranga Moana. So what's working here is different to what worked over there. They were in a kitchen with 8 bakers going hard for 48 hours. So we've done it a little bit different just to make it a little bit more easier for our bakers and also to be able to share the love a bit more wider.
Well, speaking of sharing the love, and one final question, Let's say we're going to pass on this challenge. Who do you reckon should be the next iwi to take up the Rewena-thon?
My iwi, Hainui. Hainui.
I know one of the head cooks at Tūranga Waiwai, so I'll be sure to ring her up and tell her that.
Yes, yes, I think they should.
And she's got that $1 million kitchen at Tūranga Waiwai to cook in, perhaps.
They have, just imagine what they can produce. So this is exciting, and this is the exciting thing about a kaupapa like this. It could be passed on to iwi, nominated iwi, and we're just happy, and I'm really proud of our bakers for taking up such a challenge. We've been lucky to get 11 of the bakers, but there's definitely more rewena makers here in Tūwharetoa.
Ka me tēnā kōrua me te whakaaro nui ki wō koutou kaumātua o roto Tūwharetoa. Tēnā koe. Tēnā kōrua.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora, tēnā koe. Kia ora.
What's your favourite way of eating rewena bread? Trout and rewena bread is, this morning it's my favourite, but let us know. And coming up after the break, we catch up with Māori movement practitioner Ngāti Tūwharetoa Te Wāti on what he's been doing for whānau during lockdown. Tukuna mai o koutou whakaaro mō a mātou kaupapa, pōhi mai ki te whārangi pukamata a whakaata Māori, I mera mai rānei kia Tapatahi at MāoriTelevision.com. Kia mautonu mai rā. Kei te tōpito whakamutu nā tātou e hikama, and Māori movement practitioner Ngāti Tūwharetoa Te Wāti has been helping hundreds of people during the lockdown by hosting wānanga and karakia via the Turuki Health Facebook page. He's hosted wānanga every weekday at around 10 a.m. for the past 6 weeks, with hundreds of people tuning in to start the day. Here's the video.
Tēnei wako a timatai tō tātou nei mahi ki roto I te whareaio. We've now started te whareaio. The wānanga is in play, and our people that have come forth and be guided by their tupuna are now about to embark on the journey. I'm now tuning into the purpose and the reason why people are here. And it's apparent that intergenerational trauma has been a huge effect on our people. And so that drives me to direct the wānanga to a space where healing is needed. A space of healing, there's spiritual connection, there's conscious awareness, there's the ability to understand self first more than others, and that stems from the word aroha, also known as love. And in this day and age, I think it's important for our men and our women to find balance within themselves, recreate the matrix of what our avatars are starting to present and show for itself, which is a collectiveness to tune into the ways of the universe, the ways of all of the elements that have provided resources for us, and how we treat that, and how we tread lightly in this world that's been gifted to us. So now we're going to move into the ancient world of knowledge, so we're going to go into the higher sacred school of learning, where certain symbols, we could align them to almost emojis, have wānanga inside of them. When I speak about wānanga, there is a lot of knowledge and ancient remedies that can help us find solution for the world problems at the moment, e.g. mental health, e.g. Suicide preventions, obesity, all of these bad stigmas that are now apparent on our people, from Te Ao Māori to all Indigenous people. But now it's about reclaiming the ancient world to come back into our true light.
With me now is Ngāti Tūwharetoa Te Wāti. Mōrena e hoa.
Mōrena.
Can you describe for me exactly what is Māori movement?
Well, Māori movement was formulated about 10 years ago. Sorry, we're a little bit...
Sorry, yeah, Ngāti, there we go. Yes, I was going to say, let's have a look at your face. Pai te āhua nei, me tēnei mōre, tēnei ata. Pai, ana, kōrero mai.
Sorry, mai.
Wena, kei te pai.
Ua rere ke ai tu āmera.
Pai anō kei te mārama te kite atu I nai nei, kei te pai. So kōrero mai, how tēnei mea te Māori movement?
Ko tēnei kaupapa, he kaupapa e timatai māwaka taku hoa, te kautau ki Murine. So we started Māori movement about 10 years ago, and it was just a formulative way to understand atua type of movements. So it started off as a physical koringa tinana type of kaupapa, and then it grew into wānanga space. It evolved into a wānanga space. So we just in the last couple of years have made it public for people to come in and experience the journey.
What kind of feedback have you been given from people who take part?
Well, it's different for everyone. Everyone comes in with different intentions and different needs and wants, but a lot of it, as I just spoke in the video, comes down to understanding yourself on a holistic level. So the haura and the wellness is coming back to the individual and really understanding how the power within that we have and we possess, especially if we have tātai whakapapa ki tō tātou ao Māori, that we are a powerful source enough to be able to create our destiny. So the empowerment is giving back to people, giving the power back to people to make conscious choices for themselves so that they can become who they want to be.
Karakia is also an aspect of your wānanga. You usually do karakia with others face to face. Do you find that the online aspect of karakia affects the spirituality of it all?
As long as it's done in the right way, I guess. We try and make it as transparent as possible, but make sure that people understand why they're doing the taku. And the taku really is an entrance point into that sacredness so that you could begin the work on yourself. And it's quite an easy system. You do the taku, you enter inside of that sacredness, and then to whakanoa, you exit with the taku. And so that tikanga just allows people to understand that they're going into that area to protect themselves whilst they dive into their own intuitions, their own ngākau, to reorder their hinengaru, which I like to use the shifting of the paradigms, so that they can really feel the essence of what's going on with them. And then when they come outside of the taku, that it's a form of release so that it becomes noa, free of restriction, so that they can come into the world of light and practice that in action.
People can have a very strong emotional reaction to this kind of healing, if you like. Do you find that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we want. We want people to be more in tune with their emotions, whether it's going to upset them, whether they're going to feel a little bit rangirua, because I don't feel like we should be afraid of our emotions. A lot of people mistake that for a form of mental illness. But when we're doing our work, it's making sure that we're authentically putting a platform down for them so that they can cry and grieve and feel the mamai, so that it lifts the tapu off all of the types of mamai that we're starting to see, the cause and effect of mate puku. The forms that we are starting to see our people, or the pits that we're starting to see our people fall into, is that we suppress a lot of our emotions. We suppress a lot of our emotional feelings. So once we start to bring these to the 10 houses of thought, by the time it gets to the hinengaru, we're not going mentally a little bit unstable for ourselves. We're just allowing the emotion to move from our body. And once we do that, people are feeling a little bit more enlightenment about themselves. They're feeling a little bit like the load has been lifted, and that stress that they once had is now removed.
Just talking about the stress that Māori are going through, obviously the restrictions around tangihanga are one aspect of the emotional trauma that they have to deal with in this day and age. What are your thoughts about that? And can the wānanga help people go through this?
Yeah, I had my first online tangihanga a couple of weeks ago with one of our kuia back home in Tainui, and I saw the stress on our people, predominantly our wahine, because our wahine, they need to cry, they need to grieve, and they need to express those types of emotions that they're feeling. And without that touch, you could see the stress was heightened. And it was a really confusing process for all of us, but I felt like the leaders and our tuakana that run the tangihanga process online did a fantastic job, and I feel like we're adapting. We're slowly adapting to this new way, because the inspiration from Kingi Tūwharetoa that we need to save our whakapapa by maintaining strict rules around tangihanga process at the moment was a very valid point. So once we started to formulate our wānanga towards that, it just helped the process a little bit easier. But yeah, it's still tough. It's still tough.
The wānanga and karakia that you're presently holding on Te Suruki Health's Facebook page, will they continue post-COVID?
Well, it was meant to only go for 4 weeks, but because we were serving, I think the viewing list went up to 500,000 in 4 weeks, and that went global. That wasn't just for our people, but we were getting people from Israel and Scotland and Egypt and Africa, and so I think the Orokoroa way of doing our states of Māori meditation is a bit different. We don't have a word for meditation in our whare, but you know, the Orokoroa served a different type of purpose.
Ka nui tēnā. Nā rino tēnā koe I tēnei ata, kia ora mō nā whakaaro mō wō kōrero.
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
Well, tomorrow afternoon at 1:45, Tapatahi is doing a 2-hour special about the budget and what it means for the Māori economy and Māori people. Hoi anō, coming up on tomorrow's program, we'll talk with tourism and restaurant owners on how the budget could make or break them. And we catch up with New Zealand musician and rapper Ray about his new waiata rāpiti.
Kotahiro te ahua waiaro. Mohi o ke koe kotahiro te ahua me ki anō. E hara tēnei I te mahi takitahi te oina.
Koe nā tapatahi mo te ata nei, ka nui te mihi ki nā pau kōrero I tēnei rā, a kia koutou hoki e mā takitaki maina. Kia piki te ora te kaha me te māramatana kia koutou katoa, haiku nā mo tēnei wā.